Good morning, everyone. My name is Johns NSL, and this summer at NSL, I'm interning in Congressman Jamie Raskin's office. I'm an Israeli political activist. For the past 3 years, I've been working for an Israeli organization called Peace Now, advocating for the two-state solution. NSL is all about telling a new story about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it was very surprising to discover that here in DC, people talk about our conflict like describing a football game. You choose a team, and you're assigned colors and chants and arguments, and you're expected to defend your team against all criticism or opposition. And I am here today to urge you to stop telling the old story of pro-Israel versus pro-Palestine and start telling a new story about being pro-solution. That being said, my story today is not only about being pro-solution, it's about thinking post-solution. Each and every NSL delegate came here with a project for change. My project is called Foresight. Foresight is about looking back in order to move forward. I plan to take a group of young Israelis and Palestinians my age, political activists who see themselves becoming the future political leadership in Israel and Palestine to South Africa. I want for them to be ready for the day when a political agreement is achieved between Israelis and Palestinians, by learning about the decisions made in South Africa 30 years ago and the consequences of those decisions, how they impact South Africa today. I want to tell you the story about how I started doing what I do, what I see as the quest of my life, and why we need to start talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a generational context. My father was born in Iran, to Iraqi parents who fled their home in Baghdad due to persecution. My mother was born in Israel, and her parents fought in the 1948 war and got married in captivity, where both of them were prisoners of war. I was born and raised in Israel. When I was 9, the second Intifada broke out. My childhood memories are of pictures of exploding buses and ruined homes, memories of wailing sirens and screams of parents in their funerals of their children. I am the youngest brother of 3. My two older brothers and myself, we served in the Israeli army as combat soldiers. My oldest brother Ishai served for 3 years, then my middle brother Barak served for 3 years, and then I served for 4 years. That meant that our parents had 10 consecutive years of sleepless nights. During times of tension and war, my brothers were called on for reserve duty, and all 3 of us were posted somewhere serving in the military. I served in the Israeli Special Forces in the K-9 unit. I had my own personal dog. Her name is Gigi. She was a bomb detection dog. She is a Belgian Shepherd, 45 pounds of hyperactivity. She's now retired and living with her last handler. But during my service, Gigi and I went out on hundreds of missions in the West Bank and in Gaza, and the scariest moments of my life were experienced with Gigi by my side. I experienced war and combat firsthand. I participated in funerals of friends and classmates. And during my military service, something broke inside of me. When I finished my service after 4 long years, I realized that I was suppressing post-trauma. And that my post-trauma originated not only in the experiences I had of being a combat soldier, but also a generational trauma. The trauma experienced by generations exposed to constant war, conflict, and death. My generation, our generation, was born during the first Intifada, grew up during the second Intifada, and experienced 3 Gaza wars in less than a decade. By the time I left the army, I was 23 years old, and by then I was in too many funerals for someone my age. Funerals of people younger than me, people who lost their lives as a direct result of this conflict. Realizing my combat trauma and the generational trauma, I felt trapped. All I wanted to do is to get as far as I could from that reality. So I did what a lot of my members of my generation do after their military service. I bought a one-way ticket to India, and I traveled to Nepal and Thailand and Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia and Hong Kong. This is very common in Israel. Your post-military trip is not only about having fun and seeing the world, it's about going and visiting a normal place to understand that back home is not normal. Traveling away from home gave me an opportunity to deal with my pain, to clear my head, and to decide how to move forward. After 5 months of traveling, I decided that I was ready to go on with my life, to go back home. I decided to surprise my parents on my birthday, so I didn't tell anyone I'm coming back except my brothers. When the wheels of the plane touched the tarmac at Ben Gurion Airport, after a 12-hour flight, I took the phone from out of my backpack and turned it on. I was immediately flooded by hundreds of messages from friends from the unit asking me if I heard the news. I learned that while I was in the air, a group of IDF officers were patrolling the northern border of Israel. An anti-tank missile was launched at them from Lebanon and 2 soldiers were killed. One of them was Yochai, or Jucha, the older brother of Tamir, my best friend from my military service, a person I considered and still consider literally my brother from another mother. This caught me completely off guard. My welcome home party was a punch to my gut. Broken and confused, I surprised my parents, I hugged them, I went to sleep, and the next morning I started my birthday at Jucha's funeral in Mount Herzl, Israel National Military Cemetery, Arlington. I was crushed. I thought I could get over my trauma, continue with my life, but I realized that I can't. I realized that war and conflict have been the soundtrack of my generation, and it was at that moment that I decided to dedicate my life to make sure that the next generation will grow up with a different soundtrack. From my own personal post-trauma and my collective generational post-trauma, I joined Peace Now, first as a volunteer, then as a staff member. And if I had to choose one sentence that would encapsulate my political motivation, it is this: a conflict that we pass on to our children is a conflict we lost. In Peace Now, I was the head of the education department. I trained young Israelis to talk to other young Israelis about the conflict. My job was to create a generational call to action on a nationwide scale, and I did it with passion due to my personal political motivation. My generation in Israel did not meet Palestinians while growing up. Our parents used to drive into Palestinian cities, but since the Second Intifada and the building of the separation wall, my generation had a different reality. The first encounter between an Israeli and a Palestinian is usually hostile and violent. These are not circumstances where understanding and empathy and trust can exist. In my work in Peace Now, I started meeting young Palestinian activists, talking with them, arguing with them, and making meaningful relationships with them. It was in programs like NSL that I learned that I had more in common with them than with my own political leadership. I cannot emphasize enough how programs like NSL are influential. The conversations that are discussed in the workshops and even over dinner could have never happened back home. I am deeply grateful for having this opportunity, and I wish more people from my generation would have this chance to get far from home in order to get a new perspective and realize how similar we are. Faura and Muhammad and I have more to talk about than Netanyahu and I. But the only way we can meet on equal terms is outside the region. I realize that just like my trip to the Far East, sometimes you need to get far from home in order to get perspective and insight about home. Working at Peace Now gave me an understanding about a feasible two-state solution should and will look like. I think that the day when this political solution will be negotiated is not that far away. I can give you numbers and I can draw you a map of what I think is going to happen. A general understanding of the possible solutions to the core issues of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict already exists. I can talk about security and borders, about refugees and Jerusalem. However, nobody is talking about the day that follows the agreement. The current generation of politicians are talking about the solution as the end game. But in order for a solution to endure, we must build the capability to conduct a conversation. A conversation about recognition, about accountability, about compensation, about commemoration, about justice. My project, Foresight, is about creating the framework for this conversation on the individual level, the community level, the group, and the society level. We are facing a long and complicated process like we have seen in Ireland and South Africa. But this process needs to be carefully planned, and no one is planning it. We are the generation that will inherit political and social power in the post-agreement reality. And that is why we are the ones who need to initiate this conversation and plan this process. My project is to learn from South Africa, a land torn by years of war, hate, and oppression, a land that forged a different path and told a new story to the world by creating a system of transitional justice with the Truth and Reconciliation Committees formed after the collapse of the apartheid regime. The perspective you get from traveling away from home is unique and can't be achieved artificially. Walking the streets, hearing the stories from the people themselves is essential for understanding how we can move forward. Just like me standing here and sharing with you my story, not the story of a random Israeli and not through video or a movie. Sharing the room with you, sharing the stage with Muhammad and Thawra is much more powerful. Nelson Mandela said in his inauguration speech, "We succeeded to take our last steps to freedom in conditions of relative peace. We commit ourselves to the construction of a complete, just, and lasting peace." He understood that a political solution is only the beginning of a much bigger process. The role of the next generation of Israeli and Palestinian political leaders is to create stable foundations upon which an agreement can last in the face of post-agreement crisis. Traveling to South Africa away from home will give us a new perspective. We will be able to learn from the successes and failures of South Africa so that instead of passing to our children a conflict or an unstable peace, we will be able to give them a complete, just, and lasting peace. I have faith in my generation to overcome the challenges ahead. Thank you.